I am at a loss on how to discuss this game. This is my 6th take, and every previous take has been cursed at some point or another. Either the first one, where I just went off on too many different directions, the second one, where I discussed more things that have nothing to do with this game, the third one, which just ended horribly because the reflective surface of something that I showed off ended up revealing things that I don't want to be revealed. And it's just... So I'm here again on take 6. I don't know why I'm still doing this. This is Hyperdimension Mk2 Neptunia. This is the second game, though it has nothing to do with the first one, except it's in the same universe. It's not the same continuity, though. Alright, so, what does that mean? Alright, so, imagine you're reading a Batman comic, right? You're reading Batman comic, and then let's say you read Superman Red Son, and Batman shows up, but he looks nothing like the Batman of the Batman comic that you're reading. That's because the Red Son Batman is a different continuity, but they're both still Batman. Alright, I don't know if that's the best example I can use, but that's the best one I'm gonna use. The two separate continuities. So, two different universes, dimensions, and that's all canon to this series. Like, there is an Ultra Dimension, which is revealed in the third game, which exists parallel to the Hyperdimension, and then there's the Mega Dimension, which exists in the Mega Dimension Neptunia, which was a PS4 game. It's just all over the place. It gets very, very complicated very quickly. And it starts to get annoying in this one, because when you start this game up, you're like, what's going on? Nothing makes sense. Nothing. None of the characters make sense. You have no idea who these guys are unless you played Victory first like I did, so I know who these are. But the story and what's going on with the R-Bar Syndicate and all that, there's so much stuff happening in this game that didn't happen in the first game. And you have to do a lot of figuring things out. Luckily, there is a thing called the Neppedia. That is Neppedia. That's Wikipedia, but Nep is in front of Wiki, so it's a Neppedia. So you read that, you read all the new stuff, and then you're caught up. So that luckily the game has that, so you can read it and get caught up. The main character is Nepgear here. These are the CPU candidates. The CPU candidates represent handhelds. That's why Vert, who represents Microsoft, who represents Xbox, does not have any CPU candidates' younger sisters. These are all younger sisters of the main four goddesses. So that would be Nepgear is Neptune's younger sister, Uni here is Noir's younger sister, and Rom and Ram are Blanc's younger sisters. Nepgear here represents the console that came out a very long time ago that I actually have, called the Sega Game Gear. Now, this Game Gear has a reflective surface. That's why I had to friggin' cancel it before do another take, because I hate these reflective screens, man. Lighting is very, I don't like that. Either way, this was your Game Gear. I could talk for a long time about this. The Game Gear here has an awesome D-pad. Probably one of the best D-pads that we would have on a mobile handheld. Until maybe the PSP. Because the PSP had something really cool too. This, as the little circular device, it acts like a mix between a D-pad and an analog stick. So you can go in all of the all 8 directions. The diagonal buttons are these buttons right here. You could it's just really nice. I really liked this. You get your basic buttons here. There's your start button. There's no select button. And then, of course, the reason why people hated this thing: 6 batteries! And they didn't last that long! So that's nuts! And then they take cartridges, so that's fine. And then, of course, when you go up here... Oh, look, there's a reflective surface there, too. Fuck me, though. You can't really tell what that is, I guess. Alright, that's fine. I'll leave that in. I don't care. But there's your power button. You can AV it. You can put your AV cable, plug it into the wall, and play it powered that way. And that's how I play it, because fuck using 6 powers, no way. And then, of course, here's your power button right there. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. The problem with these things is their screens. These things' screens are terrible. Though the screen is perfect, it's terrible at the same time. This thing came out as the answer to the Nintendo Game Boy. The Nintendo Game Boy only had 2 colors, green and gray. This had the full range of color that a TV screen would have, but the problem is that these screens failed fast. They failed so friggin' fast, I'm not sure any original Game Gear that still exists today has a working original screen. The screen had to have been replaced at some point in time. Mine is broken and needs to be replaced. That's why I don't play this. I just keep it because it looks amazing. It looks amazing and it looks good for decoration. Either way, she represents the Game Gear. Uni represents this bad boy, the PlayStation Portable. And again, I'm covering the screen because reflectiveness, I don't like reflections. This is a joypad little thing. This is your joystick here, and there's your D-pad buttons. These work very great for pressing diagonally, but if you don't want to, you could use this to press diagonally if you wanted to, because you get your full range. Though there's no R3 button. There's no R2 or R1 button either. You only got your R1 and your L1. Well, you could plug it in your ears and listen to it that way if you wanted to. I think that is down here. There's your little plug-in for your headphones, so if you wanted to play that way, you could do that. And then here's where you charge it and play it when plugged into the wall. Where do you replace the battery? Here is where you can take your battery out, and if you wanted to put your battery in here, you could put it in this way. I took mine out because, you know, finding a working battery for this thing was a nightmare. And then you got this place, you know, my UMD kind of broke, but I have a rant for UMDs that I'm going to actually do for right now, because it was a fantastic rant in the previous take, and I'm not going to deprive this review of it. Now, the PSP is the only console, the only one. Let me pause to see if I can. Okay, there you go. It's not reflecting anything when it's just sitting there, so I'm just going to leave it sitting there for right now. The PSP was the only thing that played something with a hilarious name. A hilarious thing. This is the closest example I have here. This is a Universal Media Disc. The Universal Media Disc exclusively plays on the PSP. You see the reflective surfaces. You can see my fingers and all that crap on the screen, all that crap and all that stuff. That's why I gotta angle my head away from this stuff so you can't see that stuff. Either way, the UMD is a universal media disc, and the way that he took it out. Let me pause again here. That's what your universal media disc looks on the bottom side. The laser would read it through here. This is where the disc is exposed. Otherwise, it's protected by this plastic covering, which I do like. I do like the protective little casing to keep your disc snug and secure, so if you dropped it, it wouldn't actually mess things up. You know, it wouldn't actually screw crap up or whatever. Either way, I liked it. But what I hated about these UMDs is that it's misleading in a title-wise. Why would you call something universal if only one thing ever can read them? Why would you call it universal if only one thing can read it? The PSP is the only thing ever out here that can read PSP games, the UMDs. The PSP is the only thing that can read them. Your PC cannot read UMDs. Your PS3 cannot read UMDs. Your PS4 cannot read UMDs. Your PS5 cannot read UMDs. And your PS Vita cannot read UMDs. Only the PSP can read and play PSP games. And there are so many exclusive titles for this console that... So the PSP plays UMD discs. The UMD disc would go into this little handy-dandy little snug. Now, mine is broken because my laser failed, and when I was younger, I was an absolute dumb diddly dumpkins. I tried to wiggle this around to make the laser work, but it wouldn't work. So, I ended up breaking the little metal snug thing and yanked it out, so it's never gonna read them again. But I keep it for display. I keep it for display, and it looks great. But you would put your UMD disc in here, and you would snug it closed like this, and then you would sit it down and play your game. Now you would turn it on using this little switch, where I'm pointing at right here. This switch, you would press upwards, and you would turn it on. Now here we go. This little switch right here, you hold it up, and they would turn it on. But the problem is, what happened with a lot of people is that when you thought when you were going to turn the game off and you had the game still on and all that crap, when you're going to turn the console off, you just flick it up, and then the screen would go dark. The screen would go black, and you thought, all right, the console's off, and then you would flick it down to go into hold so that it wouldn't turn on accidentally in your pocket. Then when you're ready to play again, you would flick it back up, and the screen pops on, and in fact, it would take you right back into the game. It would take you right back into the game, as if the game went on pause. That's because your PSP went into sleep mode. It didn't actually turn off. That's why the laser was actually still working that entire time. So you actually burnt it out and made it too weak, and it wouldn't be able to read future UMD discs, because you would keep putting it into sleep mode instead of turning it off. The way you would turn it off is you would have to hold the power thing up and hold it, and then it would turn off, instead of just flicking it up and then putting it in sleep mode. Now, that's what happened with me, and that's probably what happened with a lot of other people, too. These things, they're lasers, they just don't work. I don't know why they chose the Universal Media Disc instead of using a cartridge-based type of thing. The PS Vita uses a chip-based type of game cartridge, whatever, and it worked better than the PSP. The PSP and the PS Vita are fantastic consoles, though. They are fantastic. There are so many great games on both of those handhelds that so many people haven't gotten to play because they're print run. All of the games have very low print runs, and there's way too many exclusives that only came out in Japan, most of them being visual novels. But that's how it worked over there, man. These visual novels could be released very cheaply, and people like reading, and these are like visual books basically, and they get to read their story while they're on the bus, the train, or whatever, on their way to whichever prefecture or district or whatever, when they're going to school or whatever. That they're very on the go type of person, and the handhelds were fantastic over there, but they failed over here because, well, we're just not on the go as much. And when we are, we tend to bring our phones and play on our phones. But let me tell you exactly why I prefer the PSP to my phone. Take a look at this screen. The screens are relatively the exact same size, but the problem is, these buttons here, they're not here. Which means on the touch screen, you would have the virtual buttons that you would have to touch your screen to play them on, press your little buttons over here, and your little joystick buttons, and your D-pads, and then you would have the R1 or R2 button if you needed to use those up here, and it was just, no, I hated that. I hate doing that, okay? I prefer to have these. I prefer to have buttons that exist separately to the screen, so I don't have to keep touching the screen and getting it dirty and having to clean it up every single freaking time. It bothered me. I didn't like it. That's why I prefer a handheld game system to playing on my phone. But I am a minority. So that's my little rant on the PSP. The Uni represents the PSP. Now, ROM and RAM, the reason why Blanc has twin sisters, maybe if you didn't know this, Nintendo has had the most handhelds ever. They have the original Game Boy, they have the Game Boy Color, they have the Game Boy Advance, they have the Game Boy Advance SP. I do consider it to be a separate thing, though I guess arguably it's still the same thing. It plays Game Boy Advance games, so I'll just say the Game Boy Advance then. And then what else was mobile? They also had the Nintendo DS, and then they had the Nintendo 3DS, and now they technically have the Switch, which is both a console and a handheld at the same time. Nintendo rules the handheld market, and that's one of the reasons why the PSP and the PS Vita failed. Though, I would argue that the PSP and the PS Vita both have fantastic JRPGs on them. The lower budget ones, like Hyperdimension Neptunia, that NIS Falcom, Compile Heart, Gust. So many of these lower budget JRPG makers made plenty of games for the PSP and the PS Vita. There were so many of them that were released on there. They had better screen, better graphics than the Game Boy Advance, than the Nintendo DS. They had better graphics than those, because the PSP was like a mobile PS2. It wasn't as strong as the PS2, but it was basically a mobile PS2. And the PS Vita was basically like a mobile PS3. It wasn't as strong as the PS3, but you could play it mobile. And those were fantastic reasons to have those. And, well, they made plenty of JRPGs for both of them. Plenty of them. And since I'm the JRPG guy, I love these JRPGs because they tend to make story first before the gameplay. And the reason why this one fails is because the story is worse than the gameplay. Oh, I like the story. I do. I liked it. I played it to completion. I got the true ending after all. Anyways, let's talk about these two. These two represent the DS. That would be this little puppy right here. The DS. I have a DSi here, as you can see clearly. They have the L1 and R1 buttons that the Game Boy Advance introduced. Alright. They're fine. They're nice little clicking sounds. Your cartridge would go in here. There's only one slot in this one. There are other versions that have multiple slots to put your cards in to play games on. So you would plug in your little cartridge in here, because these are cartridge-based games. You could use this to power it. Let's see what else we got on here. This is where you put your headphones to listen to it that way. Here's how you control your volumes. Instead of a sliding little bar that you can slide up and down, like on your Game Boy Advance SP, not SP, the Game Boy Advance and your Game Boy Color and all that stuff, they have buttons. So you can press this button to go up, this button to go down, whatever. Now let's try to open this screen. Alright, we could open the screen and angle it that way. So you got your power button here, that's typical. You got your select. Oh, holy shit, it turned on. Holy crap, that surprised me. Oh, never mind. I guess the battery, there's still some battery in here. I didn't know that. Either way, you can turn it on that way. There's your select, there's your start. There's your, these two have two extra buttons here, your X button and your Y button. Since I've actually never gotten this thing to actually work, I got a handheld. I don't have a power cord for it. I need to actually get a power cord for it to actually get it to play. So I'm gonna have to get that, a DSi power cord. But you got your X and the Y. I have no idea what they do, but I guess they're just two extra buttons. So now you got 4 buttons, kind of like the PSP. So you got your 4 buttons here. You can start select typical controls. I don't know too much about the Game Boy Advance DS because I skipped out on the DS generation. I skipped out on the 3DS generation. I stopped after the Game Boy Advance. I know more about the Game Boy Advance than I do about the 3DS, but this is what Ramen Ramen based off of. The odds of my having those handhelds were insane. I had no idea that I could just show visually, it's like that, and go off on a little tangent about that, but that was amazing that I just had those in a drawer right next to my desk. So that was cool, that was great. The characters, their personalities, though. Now I talked about Nepgear. She's mild-mannered. She's kind. She's great. She's basically the opposite at start. She's a lot like Noir. She's a very Sundeer type of character. If you don't know what that is, you feel free to Google it. I'm not gonna weeabo this crap. So Uni is very snooty at first, but then she's very kind under the surface, and they become best friends. And Rom is very shy and reserved, and then they become kind of best friends. Ram is very rude and mean and very protective of Rom, so she hates Nepgear, and she kind of hates Uni. She hates everybody that isn't Rom. She's very protective of Rom. And eventually, by the end of the game, she grows on Nepgear, all that stuff. So that's cool, it's fine, it's cute. Story-wise, Nepgear has to recruit these three in order to combat CFW Witch and rescue their older sisters and Vert. Once they do that, they have to defeat the A6 Syndicate and stop R4's revival, which they failed to do. R4 survived, so you gotta fight R4 and beat her. Once you've beaten R4, the game is done. That's how you get the true ending, at least. Now, the way to get the true ending is a lot easier to do than in the first Neptunia game. In the first Neptunia game, you had to recruit Vert, Blanc, and Noir using the shares mechanic, which means you had to repeat dungeons so many friggin' times to manipulate the shares. It was so hard to do, so long, so tedious. It was not really hard, it was just tedious. It was long. It took a long time to do. A lot of grinding. I hated it. In this one, you don't really have to grind at all. You just have to do a couple missions from the guild, which are very quick and very easy. And you probably get it done by Chapter 2. And once you do that, you just recruit Blanc, Vert, and Noir, and then you can get onto the true ending path after getting their affection ratings to rank 5 or higher. I think it's 5 or higher, though it might be 4 or higher. And once you do that, you get the true ending, and then that's fine. And getting their affection rank, let's talk about Lily ranks. Lily ranks are introduced in this game. Lily ranks are basically your affection ranks, how characters feel about Nepgear. And there's 2 ways to increase it. The first way is through combat. You have them in your active party, and every time you win a battle, they increase in Lily rank just a little bit. But the main way you can do it is by viewing their bonus cutscenes. You go into one of the 4 hubs, the 1-4 Last Station, Planetoon, Louis, or Leanbox. You go into one of the 4 hubs, and you go into the Chirper. A Chirper is basically, you can talk to the NPCs in the town, and your main characters are also hanging out in the town. You can talk to them, and you get a bonus cutscene. The bonus cutscene will give you increased affection ratings. That's the best way you can build it. And in between every major story mission or dungeon, you can view more of these. They're not missable. You can just view them in order, out of order, who cares? But you can get your affections up to do this true ending just fine by just viewing all of those. You don't really have to worry about grinding battles, none of that. No. You can get everything maxed just by playing the game normally. You can beat the game roughly between level 65 to 70 pretty easily. So, and you can get to level 65 to 70 just by beating the monsters. If you don't run from every battle, and you just fight all of the monsters in the dungeons, no grinding, just fight them as you see them, you will eventually get to that level naturally by the time you fight the final boss. So that's a lot easier to do. I didn't have to grind for the true boss like in the first game, so this is a lot easier to beat. You could beat this thing if you speedrun it within like 3 hours. You could really do it fast. You skip every cutscene. And there's a skip battle button too, like in the first game you could hold down L2, and you could skip cutscenes, you could skip combat animations, so that speeds up battles really quickly. It's very well made for like that grinder in you. So if you don't feel like grinding, you can speed it up. Now let's talk about this. This is the M rating. This is the only one in the main trilogy that has this. In fact, I think it's the only one in this series that has this. And there is no reason for it to be here outside of there's one thing. The only thing I can think of that might warrant an M rating is that, well, these are teenagers. Nepgear and Uni. These guys are like teenagers, maybe 16 or something. So that's legal age of consent in Japan, right? These were not. And there is a villain called CFW Trick, who I'm not a big fan of this guy. He's not necessarily friendly. he's not a good character. He's not a nice character. And if you get uncomfortable with that type of stuff, I implore you to hold down the square button and skip all of his lines of dialogue, all of his cutscenes. Skip them. Just skip them. Just skip to the combat, beat him up, and then proceed with the game. But that's the reason why it's got an M rating, is because of CFW Trick's lines of dialogue. It's just dialogue. There's nothing that's shown. No, it's just lines of dialogue. And if you get uncomfortable with that crap, press the square button and skip it. I didn't, because I wanted to read all the lines of dialogue just to find out why. I wanted to find out why. And then after I met CFW Trick, I knew why. And that's not nice. It's not good. But it's not too offensive either. It's just anime crap. If you've watched tons and tons and tons of anime, you will have come across a villain like this. And that villain usually gets his ass kicked. He does. And you get to kick his ass plenty of times. And it's very, very rewarding to kick this villain's ass. So, beat him up and skip his dialogue. Just do that. If you don't want to see it, if you don't want to know anything about CFW Trick, just beat him up and skip his dialogue. That's why it's an M rating. There's no blood, gore, guts, no, it's just CFW Trick. CFW Trick is the reason why this is rated M. And I can see why now. I can see why. Okay, let's talk about the story, though. I talked about the villains. There's CFW Trick, there's CFW Witch, CFW Brave, and CFW Judge. The 4 main villains, and then there's 2 Team Rocket style villains. There's Underling, aptly named, and Pirachu. Pirachu is based off of Pikachu, Pokemon, but he's Pirachu, and he's funny, he's fine. I liked him. These 2 are recurring villains, and they're charming, they're fun, they're the best part of this game, outside of maybe CFW Brave. So let's talk about CFW Brave. First we're going to talk about Underling and Pikachu. These guys just show up. They're basically like the grunts during the first half of the game. You keep running into them. They're the ones working for the main 4, and you stop their plans. You beat them up. You get to fight these guys up to 8 times, and there you get progressively stronger each time. But you beat them up, and they're gone. But they have great dialogue. They're very funny. They're easily the best parts of this game. Underling and Pikachu. They're funny. They're great. They're fantastic. CFW Brave is probably my favorite. The main Trick is terrible. He's a naughty person. Then there's Witch, and she's fine. Whatever. I don't care. Judgment guy, he's fine. I don't care. But CFW Brave is the best villain in this game outside of Underling and Pikachu. CFW Brave isn't really a villain. He's kind of like an anti-hero. Or maybe an anti-villain. His motivations are to help people. And CFW Brave and Uni. CFW Brave and Uni represent a big argument. And I loved it because Uni represents the PSP. And the PSP has a notorious history with hacking. A lot of people hacked into this thing. It got a lot of patches, a lot of upgrades to the security, and people kept on hacking it again and again and again to do pirate stuff, to be mean, do naughty little things. They did naughty little things historically with the PSP, right? They did that. And this game talks about that in nods to it through CFW Brave and Uni. CFW Brave's motivations, he's trying to justify hacking and pirating, because he's saying that poor people should have fun too. Not a lot of poor people can afford all of the nice games, all of the good games, and CFW Brave says he wants poor children to be happy, and he's justifying being able to give these children the means of having things that they otherwise would not have been able to afford, right? And Uni can't necessarily disagree with that, though she says that if everything was free, that would ruin the incentive for people to create things. So if nobody made money for the things that they created, then these people wouldn't even be able to have anything to play to begin with. So you have to have this little balance. You have to have something cost a little bit in order to give creators an incentive to create things, because they want a reward for their hard work. So that's basically what that is. And I like that argument, the little dialogue between CFW, Brave, and Uni. Brave isn't a villain. He's misguided. He has good intentions, but he's misguided into thinking that you should pirate to help people who couldn't afford these things to begin with. And Uni says that you have to have things cost a little bit to justify the creation of things, so that people who create things get compensated for their efforts, for their work. And that's a good argument. It's very smart. That's the smartest thing in this game. Everything else is blah. CFW Trick is terrible. CFW Witch is basically R4 2.0, which is okay, I guess. And CFW Judge is just a brute. I don't have anything to talk about with CFW Judge. He's just a brute. The best dialogue, villain-wise, comes from Underling, Purju, and CFW Brave. The best banter comes from Nepgear and the other CPU candidates. They're fine. But sometime around Chapter 5 of the game, basically the halfway point, you rescue the sisters, and Neptune joins you automatically. And her dialogue is, well, she's voiced by Melissa Fawn. Melissa Fawn voices the English version of Neptune for almost every installment, if not every installment, that they have an English version of Neptune on. And she's great in the role, but her Neptune as a character has been completely diminished in this game in order to justify and keep Nepgear elevated above her sister. And I would argue that you shouldn't have purposefully diminished Neptune to build Nepgear up. Because Nepgear's a mid-character. I don't know if I talked about this on this version, this take or not. I've done plenty of takes. I've said a lot of this stuff before, so I can't remember if I've said it before or not. But you could have done Neptune better. I don't blame Melissa Fawn at all. I don't. Somebody wrote this dialogue. Somebody translated it. Somebody originally wrote this in Japanese, wrote the dialogue out. Somebody originally made Neptune not as good as she was in the first game. And then somebody else just translated it into workable English. And Melissa just read it. She read the lines. She delivered it the best she could. I have no fault against her at all. She does perfect for Neptune in this character, in this franchise. She's perfect as Neptune. It's just, Neptune is very diminished in this on purpose. Her personality, her jokes, her quips, her self-awareness. She's basically like a Deadpool type of character. She's very self-aware, and she's all of that stuff that was at the core of her character in the first game is gone in this one, and that disappointed me big time. The other three are fine. Noir, Vert, and Blanc, they're fine. All of their main cutscenes, their personalities, everything's intact, and they're fine. It's just Neptune that's not as good, and I was disappointed in that. Otherwise, there's not too much else I could talk about with Hyperdimension Neptunia Mk2. It's a better game, gameplay-wise, but it's not a better story. I would only play this if you play the Rebirth version, because the Rebirth version does have a lot of improvements. Dialogue's a little bit different, but the story's mostly the same. But I think Neptune is a lot better in the Rebirth version than in this original version. That's why this original version is the cheapest of the trilogy that came out for the PS3. This one is the cheapest one. You can probably find it for like $15. The first one's probably around $30. The fourth one's probably around $30 or $40. This one's about $15. This is not as good. That's why. Both of them had about the same print run. Maybe this one had a little bit more than the first one, but even then, it's just not as in high demand. The Rebirth games are the way to play these games. You can play them right now off of Steam. That's where I recommend you play them. Be imaginative, everybody.